Hi, this is my review of Slumbering Ursine Dunes. Slumbering Ursine Dunes is a campaign that can be used with old school Renaissance games such as Labyrinth Lord, Dungeon Crawl Classics, etc. This mini campaign contains some very colorful and unique features. It feels like the combination of Russian aesthetics and folklore with elements from the dying earth, and everything is held together in a framework of surrealism. It feels like dreamlike and nightmarish at times because there's a very strong sense of chaotic, out of control atmosphere covering the entire campaign. Now, let's talk about the quality of the PDF. Well, the quality is pretty good, but I just have to mention some things that I would consider negatives, and that's the lack of bookmarks, of a table of contents, and hyperlinks. So it's really difficult to navigate the entire PDF. I recommend that you print this PDF as soon as you can. Well, most of it is in black and white, so it's quite printer friendly. And the illustrations are so simple enough, so you won't spend too much ink when printing this document. But besides that, everything is well organized and written. I did find a few typos in the presentation page, that is page 2 on the PDF, but everything else is well organized and written. And something that I really liked is that they pay a lot of attention to detail. So for example, it contains all the information necessary to run the non-player characters according to their personalities and objectives, agendas, etc. So the quality is good overall, and you also have some pretty nice black and white illustrations with that aura or sense of weirdness. So you will understand how to run everything here quite easily. You'll just have a bit of a hard time navigating the document. Now, let's talk about the contents. Something that is quite unseen when it comes to sand crawl campaigns such as this one is that instead of handling as sort of like a hex crawl, it is handled as a point crawl. That is, you have a map with different points and representing different locations and areas, but you need to go through certain points to reach other points. So for example, if you want to go from point A to C, you have to go through B first. So, because this setting is all about these very difficult to navigate dunes. So some dunes are quite impossible to cross or move through. Maybe if your character has a lot of constitution, because there are rules for that, or maybe you are using some sort of flying spell or device, it could be possible to move from one point to another when it comes to the forbidden paths between points. But overall, you will have to do a lot of walking around, and I think that it's a great way to communicate that sense of hardship while traveling through the dunes. Now, as to the plot of this setting, it feels somewhat shamanistic. You basically have this goddess that almost on a whim sent forth this cold force or weather, and everything was quite difficult for the beings moving across that coldness. But there was this family that decided to brave that cold weather because they thought that there was this like a promised land beyond that difficult to traverse or to surpass coldness. So they started moving through this weather, and one survivor of that family called Mirko was left alone, and he went to sleep, but he was attacked by this bear, and the bear ate one of his legs, but he managed to kill the bear. But then, in a sort of like an act of understanding and greater awareness of life, he becomes one with the bear. So Mirko is no longer Mirko. He becomes this sort of like a demigod called Medved, the seeker of honey. So he's kind of like a half man, half bear creature. And you will see a lot of half men, half bear creatures in this setting. They are known as bearlings, but you also have a character class for that. I will talk about that near the end of this review. And these are kind of like fighter bears, and with their own culture and traditions, and they feel like the staple folk or people of the setting. And you have all the information of the different factions and non-player characters in the setting. So for example, you have Jaromir, the old smith, who is lawful good. He is kind of like, he represents civilization in this wilderness of treacherous dunes. And you also have more details on Medved, the sort of like the bear god of the setting. You also have information on other factions such as the Eld, who are kind of like, they feel like extraplanar elves that are quite cruel and arrogant, and they are actually tearing a hole through the veil of reality, connecting this plane with other planes. And so they are sort of like the source part, or at least part of the source of the chaos of the setting, and I will talk about that in a few minutes. And then you have the sort of like pirates led by Ondrir the River. And he's kind of like a were shark, and he feels like he has this violence almost about to burst. So even though you could negotiate with him, it kind of feels like he wants to jump at the player characters at all times. And you have all the information, the rivalries and between the factions, all the information necessary for the player characters to negotiate or form alliances with the different non-player characters. And as I was telling you, it contains all the details of how each of these non-player characters speak, the types of words that they use, the mood, etc. So that's pretty cool. Now, this entire setting is filled with adventure seeds. You have rumors, and each point of the map has adventure seeds and sites and areas, locations. So you will find some very strange things. You will find many otherworldly statues, because these dunes, this area of dunes and weirdness feels like it's very ancient. It kind of feels like it's like another plane brought to this side of reality, so to speak. And you have areas such as the hitching post and magic staircase. You also have toll collectors, you have a camp of centaurs, and you have groves. You can run into a group of rusalkas that perhaps many of you know already, that rusalka is kind of like a water spirit from Russian folklore. In role-playing games, they are usually hostile. And then you have different adventure sides. You have some non-player characters that seem a bit crazy, but when if you handle the situation diplomatically, they could actually help the party. You have an Eld who isn't as cruel as the other Eld, but that's in a very loosely way of speaking. So that means he may actually listen to some of the things that the party members will say, and may actually form an alliance with them, but perhaps he will backstab them later on. It's kind of like that sort of relationship or interaction. And then you have other places like the cairns and the rainbow sandstone, the ironwood grove. And now here you get two adventure sites, fully detailed. So those are two complete dungeons, so to speak, for the player characters to go into them and brave their different hazards and inhabitants and get some treasure and experience in the process. So for example, you have the Golden Barge, which is kind of like this huge ship that kind of like rammed into the sand of the dunes, and it also feels a bit like a Russian castle. It has these like onion-shaped domes. And it feels also like a living ship, like an organic creature. There are these sort of like, they are called ghouls, but not ghouls as the typical undead creature that paralyzes you when it attacks you. These ghouls are similar, but they're more like antibodies of that ship. That is, when you enter that structure, you will find organs and things that resemble sort of like a living body. It's quite weird. And you also have a tower which is called the... Let me see if I can find the name. Sorry about that. I saw it about... Here it is. The Glittering Tower. The Glittering Tower is kind of like the base of Medved. It's a shining tower because it has these mollusk shells covering the outside of the structure, and the inside feels extraplanetary and otherworldly. So I really can't express the sensation that I got from it when I first started reading the description of the structure. But one thing is certain: the upper part, that is the tower, is quite pristine, but it also has a dungeon, and this dungeon creates a very evident contrast. It's dark and somewhat dirtier when compared to the upper part, and there are many dangers and enemies below. So that's a very interesting adventure site because it feels like the upper part could be navigated through stealth and diplomacy, but the lower part is just a very dangerous and deadly dungeon. I can already imagine an entire party dying in its depths. And now let's talk about the chaos that I mentioned because of the tearing of the veil. There's a set of tables that represent things that can get weirder and weirder as the player characters adventure on through this setting. So at first things won't be as weird. Maybe you will get blood rain, or there will be a phantom pylon, or maybe there will be some weird fog coming from the sea in the south. But as the player characters kill non-player characters and accomplish different things, things will get weirder and weirder. Magic will become powerful and yet unpredictable. So you will get effects such as hallucinations, night visitations when the player characters are sleeping and they feel like they're being attacked by these entities. Objects will appear out of nowhere, and things then will get even worse. For example, you will see otherworldly vessels entering, and you will find even like demigods and godlings entering this plane, and magic will become even more unpredictable. And all of this is affected by the actions of the player characters, so that's pretty cool. Now, near the end of this document, you have a Beastiary with all the weird creatures that you will find. Some of them are taken straight out of the Dying Earth. So, for example, you have the Pelgrains. You also have the ghouls that I mentioned. You also have some other more semi-standard creatures, such as cave dwarves, which are kind of like more feral and civilized dwarves. You have soldier bears. Many weird creatures like two-headed giant vultures. It offers a pretty good variety for your player characters to fight against those creatures or perhaps interact with them semi-peacefully. And now you also have some very unique spells, but the unique part, well, that's also debatable because, for example, you have the spell Summon and Bind Minor Sandestin, and this is a spell from the Dying Earth. This is I'm really pleased with this because the interaction between wizards and Sandestins in the Dying Earth novels is pretty cool, or in the fourth novel. And here you have all those loopholes and cumbersome, even annoying details when a mage interacts with a Sandestin. The Sandestin isn't always like too eager of doing what it's being asked of it, so the Sandestin is always trying to worm its way out of the bargain, so to speak. And you have unique classes. First, we have the cave dwarf, and as I was telling you, this is more like a savage or a primitive version of the dwarf. It's going to have this character class is going to have some difficulty using more civilized and advanced weaponry, but it specializes more in the use of spears, axes, clubs, things that a caveman would be able to wield effectively. But you also have the cave dwarf has the ability of being quite efficient as a survivalist. That is, when it comes to navigating caves and stone constructions and getting food and water, this class is quite efficient at getting through those dangerous places. And then you have a character class that I really like, and that's the War Bear. And the War Bear is a soldier bear that is obsessed with polearms. Quite literally, if this bear isn't close to a pole arm for a day or two, it's going to become really depressed and dejected. But because of that, it is quite devastating when wielding pole arms, and this class has a lot of features surrounding those weapons. So those are two very cool character classes. You even have like a song, it's called the Marching Song of the War Bears to get into character. That's quite nice. And at the end of the document, you have a good variety of hirelings, because many of the adventure sites in this campaign, as I was telling you, are quite deadly. It's highly recommended that player characters get a group of hirelings so that they at least take a few of the blows, because otherwise the party is going to get slaughtered. As I was telling you, in those adventure sites that are detailed in this campaign, things are going to get really dangerous. Now let me tell you what I think of the Slumbering Ursine Dunes. This is a great campaign setting. It's a mini campaign setting, and you can take whatever you want from it. If you only like certain sides of it and the classes and monsters, you can take those and put them in your own campaign world, but I would recommend that you use the entire setting. It's too bad that it doesn't have hyperlinks and bookmarks and table of contents, but everything else is top notch. I think that this is a very good setting for the Dungeon Crawl Classics role-playing game. This is more suited for Labyrinth Lord as it is presented, but I think it's really worth it to convert it to that other system. It's just you'll only have to enact some very minor changes, but because of the chaos and the weirdness, it's just I think it's very well suited for that role-playing game. But if you want to use it with a science fantasy game or even a science fiction game, I would also recommend it. You only need to replace a few things, maybe give the bears some more high-tech weaponry and such. So overall, even if you play it as a fantasy game or if you want to convert it to some other system, I highly recommend that you get Slumbering Ursine Dunes. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.